So you want to dive into D&D history. Buckle up, because it's a wild ride. We're not just talking about some game here. This is D&D, a pop culture phenomenon, and it's got a past way more mind-blowing than you might think.
What's really something is that D&D wasn't some overnight sensation. It actually started with wargaming. Imagine these huge battles on tabletops, miniature armies, rule books you wouldn't believe, the works, but way less, fantasy stuff.
So, like chess, but with orcs and magic missiles.
Exactly, that's the vibe. The guys who made D&D, Gary and Dave, they were all about those wargaming mechanics. But they didn't stop there. They loved Tolkien, Howard, all that sword and sorcery stuff.
It's amazing how they combine those two things, strategy and fantasy. But how did they go from the idea to, actually making D&D? Was it an instant hit?
Not even close. Picture yourself back in 1974 walking into a game store, and you find this weird boxed set. Inside, there's just 3 little pamphlets. No fancy art, no guides, nothing. Just rules.
Talk about niche. Who was playing D&D back then?
It was a small crowd, mostly college students and wargaming diehards. The article we're looking at, it says they only sold about 4,000 copies in the first 2 years.
4,000? Seriously?
Yeah.
D&D was that tiny? How did it even survive?
A few things happened. One was the D&D basic set in '77. They made the rules easier, which helped get more people into it. Plus, they put it in a proper box.
So it wasn't just buried on a shelf somewhere?
Nope. It was front and center, right there with all the other games. That got a whole new crowd interested, folks who'd never even touched wargaming.
That's huge. It went from a niche thing to, almost mainstream.
You got it.
And this is where things get really interesting, am I right? D&D hits this fork in the road, splits into 2 different paths, kind of like picking your character class before a big quest. So what were those 2 paths? And how did they change everything for D&D?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So on one side, you had basic D&D. They stuck with those original rules, kept it simple, like the classic edition for people who liked it old school.
And the other path?
Yeah.
What about players who wanted something more, hardcore?
That's where Advanced Dungeons and Dragons comes in. AD&D, we call it. Think of it like D&D's bigger, more intense brother. It took those core ideas and just went crazy. More rules, more classes, more spells, really deep stuff. They introduced Thax 0 in AD&D, to hit armor class 0. Super complicated, but it shows you how much they were into the details.
So basic D&D was the cozy tavern, and AD&D was the dungeon underneath, full of traps and treasure.
Exactly. And get this, AD&D wasn't just some side project. It actually set the stage for the D&D we have today. All those rules, all those character options, it started there. But while AD&D was taking off, something else was going down. Remember that fork in the road?
Well, one path led straight into the satanic panic.
Oh man, the 80s. Big hair, neon colors, and freaking out about D&D. It's wild to think about now, but people were scared of this game like it was some evil thing.
That sounds ridiculous, right? But it was a big deal back then. They even made a movie, Mazes and Monsters.
Right.
Tom Hanks was in it back in the day. Let's just say it wasn't exactly a love letter to D&D. So the media is saying D&D is connected to, devil worship. You'd think that would scare people away. But maybe it made some people more curious. Forbidden knowledge is always tempting.
It's funny how that works, right? The satanic panic was bad news, but it also put D&D on the map.
Talk about dodging a critical hit. So while all that's going on, D&D just keeps on going.
Oh, yeah. In the 80s, it didn't just survive, it evolved.
So what's next for D&D, this game that just won't quit?
The 90s brought a whole new game. New challenges, new competition. Basic D&D had its last hurrah with a new box set, and they revamped AD&D for a second edition. But they didn't just change the cover art. They made the rules smoother, toned down some of the stuff that freaked people out, plus they went deep on world building, Introduced settings like Spelljammer, even Ravenloft.
Spelljammer. D&D in space. That's wild. But they weren't just competing with themselves, were they? What about other games?
Good point. In the 90s, you had Magic, The Gathering blowing up. Video games were getting seriously good. D&D was holding its own, but things were changing fast. And then, plot twist, TSR, the company that made D&D, they hit a rough patch.
Oh no. What happened?
They had to sell. And guess who bought them? Wizards of the Coast. The Magic. The Gathering people.
Wow, 1997.
Yeah.
That's a game changer, literally. What did Wizards do with D&D after that? Did they change everything? They knew a good thing when they saw it. Right?
Absolutely.
But like any good business, they probably wanted to put their own spin on things. So D&D 3rd edition, what made it so special?
Think of it like a total reboot. They kept the soul of D&D, the classes, the monsters, that feeling of adventure, but They brought in this whole new system.
The D20 system. Even I've heard of that, and I'm no expert. What was the big deal?
One die to rule them all. You roll that 20-sided die, add your character's bonuses, and bam. So much simpler than the old ways.
And that made a big difference.
Huge. It made the game flow better, gave players more control over their characters. You weren't just a fighter anymore, you were your fighter, with your own unique style.
So more accessible, but still deep.
Exactly. And it was a smash hit. Brought back old players, brought in tons of new ones.
So D&D doesn't stay put for long, does it?
Nope. In 2003, they came out with 3.5.
Like a director's cut.
Yeah, basically. They tweaked some rules, added some content, but kept that core D20 system. Then came the really big shakeup, 4th edition.
Ugh. 4th edition. Always heard that one caused some debate.
You could say that.
What was it about 4th edition?
They wanted to make it even more streamlined, even more tactical.
Like a video game almost.
Kind of. And that didn't sit well with everyone. Some people loved it, some people hated it.
Passionate fans, huh?
The best kind. But even with all that, they kept going.
Which brings us to today, right? 5th edition. That's the one everyone's playing now.
5th edition is huge. Came out in 2014, and it just clicked.
What did they do differently?
They went back to basics, in a way. Focused on storytelling on that classic D&D feel.
But then they threw another curveball, didn't they?
You're talking about one D&D.
One D&D. Not just a new edition, but a whole new philosophy.
It's a big change.
So what is it exactly?
It's D&D as a constantly evolving thing. No more waiting years for a new edition. They update it, refine it, listen to what players want.
That's a bold move.
It really is.
So does this mean the edition wars are over? Or are we in for a whole new kind of debate?
I guess we'll see, won't we?
One thing's for sure. D&D has come a long way. From 3 little pamphlets to a global phenomenon.
And it wouldn't be D&D without those passionate players arguing about rules and creating stories.
It really is amazing when you think about it. From those early days to now, it's all about imagination and adventure. And who knows what incredible things are next for D&D. That's the beauty of it. So until next time, keep those dice rolling.